morning, everyone. Thank you, Amanda, for the invitation and for having us all this morning. I will give a little bit more background and bio on our panelists today before we get started. So first, to my right is Collier Craft, President of Direct Communications, and he excels in both grassroots and public affairs experience. He brings to Direct Communications a unique talent and the ability to work with both corporate and public sectors, demonstrating knowledge of the goals and needs of each through his extensive media campaigns. Collier has led successful statewide public education campaigns and has experience in grassroots, coalition building, strategic counseling, media management, and public relations. Excited to hear from Collier today. In the middle, we have Ms. Lori Jhons. She joined the Alabama League of Municipalities as the Communications Director in January 2023 and previously served as Governor Kay Ivey's Director of Digital Media Relations. Upon graduation, Lori was first appointed to Governor Robert Bentley's office in 2016 to serve as a digital content producer on his communications team, and in 2017, Governor Ivey appointed Lori to serve in her administration as well. A jack of all trades in the PR field, Lori was promoted to various roles, including serving as a spokesperson, speechwriter, video producer, social media manager, and website facilitator, among others. So thank you, Lori, for joining us as well. And finally, last but not least, Jon Barganier was appointed as President and CEO of PRSA Alabama in November 2023, and in this role serves as the primary lobbyist for the association and their members, day-to-day manager of all operations of the office and staff, and direct liaison to the PRSA Alabama Board of Directors. Prior to this role, he served as the association's chief operating officer, and before joining PRSA Alabama, Jon served as the executive director for the Alabama office of the American Petroleum Institute, where he lobbied and advocated on behalf of the oil and gas industry. He spent 12 years with the state of Alabama, serving 6 years in the governor's office. During his time there, he served as legislative liaison, deputy chief of staff, and ultimately chief of staff. So thank you, panelists, for all being here today. Let's give them one more round of applause and welcome. So to get started, this will be a question to everyone. We can just pass the mic or go in any order, but in the context of your role and your work in communications and advocacy, how do you define advocacy and how do you believe it connects to PR and comms?
So first, thanks for having me. It's great to see everyone here in the room, and good to have everybody joining virtually. I'm going to try not to use my notes the whole time, but I want to make sure that I remember all of the points I wanted to share. So we help define issues, and our job is to explain our clients' positions in a way that is understandable and agreeable to the audiences that can influence the outcome. Many contentious and high-profile issues are as influenced, if not more so, by public opinion than by what happens in a boardroom. If you think about a lobbyist or a lawyer, they're focused on convincing an individual to come to a certain position. We're here to make that position easier and more palatable for those individuals to understand. As for specific issues, I may have
No, I'll ask it next. No.
Yeah, okay.
That's great.
Okay.
Well, actually, here, I'll go ahead and ask it.
So you passed down, and sorry I don't need the mic, but I'll try. So as you answer that question, perfect, Collier, if you can also cover what you see as the most important advocacy issue for the state in this legislative session as we kick off only, I guess, week 2, and how does your role help address it? So you started to cover this, but again, if you can just touch on what you see as the biggest issue this session.
Sure. Hey guys, can y'all also just talk as close to the mic as possible for the virtual folks
Yes.
here audibly? Thanks.
Is that better?
Yes. Well, it can be a little bit loud for us, but I think they're,
Yes, sorry. As for specific issues this session, there's always going to be those high-profile ones. I think based on what we're hearing from the governor's office, from legislative leadership, public safety, health insurance, Veterans Affairs issues, I think, are all going to be hot topics. With that said, even if an issue isn't leading the news that day, that week, that month, it still can be very important to a client or to an industry. And so we're constantly paying attention to see what's evolving on the landscape there, what's being introduced, and making sure that we're in a position to immediately engage from a public affairs and from a communication standpoint.
So first off, I just want to welcome everyone to the league and to our virtual joiners. We are so glad to have you. And for me personally, I am so thrilled to represent both PRSA and PRCA members. I see so many of you here and virtually, so thank y'all for joining. And I've also had the opportunity to work with all three of the panelists and moderator here, so it's a great opportunity. But going back to that first question, to me, advocacy is at the heart of what most membership-based organizations are striving to do. And so, you know, bringing to light issues and making the public more aware of who and what your membership, you know, they do on a daily basis and what y'all stand for is really what you try to do. And that advocacy is really the engine that drives what we do here at the League as far as our communications and public relations efforts, because that's what we're based on. Our organization is proud to celebrate our 90th year in May, and so we have proudly served as the voice of Alabama cities and towns. And right now we have grown to represent over 450 municipalities. So with that many municipalities, our membership has unique challenges and issues that they're facing, but two that really stand out this session are healthcare and public safety. And for us, you know, we have an awesome advocacy team led by Baker Allen, who worked with both John and I in the governor's office. And so he's a very strategic thinker and an analytical person. And so having him lead our team now over at the State House is really great for us. We're monitoring those legislative items and, you know, just trying to make sure that we're having conversations with the leadership and just staying in touch with them. So actually tomorrow we are hosting our annual advocacy day, and that's going to be at the Renaissance. We're expecting over 240 municipal leaders from around the state to be there. And we're going to have big speakers like the Lieutenant Governor, the Speaker of the House, Pro Tem Gudger, and we're also going to have two panels on healthcare and public safety, because our members are really you know, tuned in with what their communities are needing, and citizens are coming to them every day asking for you know, some solutions to these issues. And so we're hoping that by providing panelists from the governor's cabinet on some of these topics and police chiefs, that maybe we can come to some type of resolution on some of these items. I know it's not, these are not easy items to fix, but I think as long as we're trying to have the conversations and working together, that we can pull together on them. And then lastly, I wanted to say, for us, advocacy, we are also very engaged with our federal leadership. So tomorrow's event is more so focused on state leaders, but we'll actually be going to DC next month. And Alabama typically brings the largest contingent of people every year. And so we're going to meet with our congressional leaders up there and talk to them about some of these issues. And then during the fall, we'll host congressional luncheons with our congressional leaders in their districts. So it's all about building those connections, I would say, outside of the session, and then during the session, just kind of elevating them throughout. So I'm just going to pass it for the first question.
Well, thank you to the League. I see Kayla back there, and Lori, thank you all for hosting. I appreciate this. This is a good event. So I'm one of the few, if not the only one in the room that really doesn't practice PR communications every day. Amanda Salazar probably would be better suited to be sitting in this chair. from my perspective, but it certainly impacts everything we do as a trade association. I think the question was kind of how do you define advocacy? And how does it relate to PR and communications? I mean, from my perspective, my background is probably more government focused, politically focused, and it really boils down to one word, and that is influence. Obviously, advocacy is about educating. It's about getting a clear message out. But at the end of the day, I think we all are doing that so that we can influence hearts and minds as it relates to, the mission of your organization. So, from a advocacy standpoint, the things that I feel like help define that are, again, having a clear, concise message, bringing transparency to what you do when you're talking to a stakeholder or you're talking to someone that you're trying to educate from your perspective. Transparency is so important because you're in the business of building trust. You're not trying to influence in a shady way, or at least that's not how we do things. We come with the facts, and I may get into that a little bit later this morning in some of my comments, but at the end of the day, we're all trying to get to some sort of goal through words, through communication, and it's important that you do that with honor and dignity and transparency. So those are just my ideas from a layman kind of looking at it. I think the second question had to do with the legislative session. That is more kind of, I guess, in my wheelhouse. So, for those that work here in Montgomery, kind of work on those issues, I think we all kind of have this common feel to where we are for the state of Alabama at the moment, and that is that, typically you have big agenda items. You have the governor bringing, an agenda that kind of sets the path for a legislative session. You have the leadership of the Senate and the House doing their thing. In the last 3 or 4 years, the business community rallied together around very big topics, whether it had to do with investing in infrastructure in our state, reinvesting in the economic development incentives and the programs we have to bring more business to the state. Last year, we all rallied together to help reform a lot of the workforce development priorities for our state. This year, there isn't that business community coalition built around an issue, and that's okay, but the reason I bring all this up is when there is a lack of a major focus going into something like a legislative session, which is already a circus in and of itself, I pause with a little bit of concern. Direction is good, priorities are good. There are some issues, as Collier has addressed and Lori mentioned, but there isn't that big thing out there. And so from our perspective and from an advocacy kind of perspective at Manufacture Alabama, I think we're forced to be more diligent in kind of getting into the meat and potatoes of legislation itself, reviewing everything that is filed, looking at it through the lens of, can this help our industry and our members, or can this be a detriment? And then sifting through all of that. I mean, any given session, you'll have 1,000 to 2,000 bills, so there's a lot to review. So from our standpoint, our goal is to play defense this year, and advocacy does play into that. So, we can get into that down the road in this conversation, but those are my thoughts on the definition and then what's coming down the road. Was that loud enough into that microphone?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, yeah. Tell us if we need to project.
You're on being too loud than less loud.
Perfect. Well, that was great insight and setting the stage from each of you. As you heard from their bios and their answers, we have quite a diverse range of backgrounds and experiences as it pertains to communications and advocacy. So for this next series of questions, we're going to hone in on one at a time, kind of diving into your specific area and examples and insight you can share. So up first is Collier, put you on the spot. As we know, you have vast experience in grassroots campaigns, coalition building, and public awareness initiatives. So tell us, how well you can sum it up in a panel. I know it's really your career, but how you design these campaigns that successfully can bridge corporate and public sectors while also achieving policy objectives in Alabama.
So I think generally speaking, all of those components need to go into a successful initiative. When you drill down into a governmental issue, it affects people. It may affect the company's bottom line, which in turn can affect their employees, their vendors, customers, the communities in which they live and work. So it might be something like a small policy or regulatory change, but because of these ripple effects, it has the ability to impact the state at large. So I think it's really important for any successful advocacy campaign to keep that in mind and engage the people who will be affected, turning them into advocates for themselves. So I'll give you a really quick example of something that we were a part of. We've worked for the state park system for a really long time. Many of you may recall back in 2015, there was an announcement that 5 state parks were going to close, along with several other state parks, services being limited due to funds being diverted from the state park system to prop up other state agency shortfalls. So at the time of that announcement, we launched a Facebook page, I think it was the Friends of the State Parks, and we garnered 24,000 followers in less than 24 hours of releasing that news information. And so what that did is created a really powerful vehicle for us to advocate for the parks funding to be protected. There were people, organizations, companies that were equally engaged and interested in seeing that happen. And so what you saw is the legislature put a constitutional amendment on the ballot in 2016, which passed and therefore protected the state parks funding moving forward. And just a little side note, that constitutional amendment was the only thing on the 2016 general election ballot to receive more votes than President Trump. So I think that it speaks volumes about the popularity of the park system in the state parks, but also the groundswell of support that came from individuals that utilize them every day, from the business community again and other organizations, and it shows you what can happen when everybody comes together to rally.
That's great.
What a good example. I appreciate you sharing that. Lori, so from your time with Governors Bentley and Ivey to now your current role with the League of Municipalities, what do you see as the critical elements of a successful messaging strategy that resonates with both state leaders and local governments?
Well, first off, since we have mentioned starting out in Governor Bentley's office, I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to give someone flowers where they're sitting right beside me. So Jon was actually my first chief of staff whenever I was hired right out of Alabama State University, and so I appreciate you. And my first communications director, Yasmin Richardson, both Governor Ivey and Governor Bentley, for giving me that opportunity to not only work in their administration, but to grow in so many different roles. So going to the question, to me, I have three things that kind of set the stage for establishing a clear and effective communication strategy. So first off, you gotta clearly define what your end goal is. You need to make sure you're asking the right questions. You need to think about what your critics are gonna say. Look at it from every angle. And once you do that, you also need to make sure that you and your team, from the highest, from your executive director or your main leader down to the bottom, everyone needs to make sure they clearly know what that goal is, because sometimes, I'm sure all of you have faced it, you have to pivot and things pop up, and you might get some impromptu media questions, and so you need to make sure that everyone knows what those essential talking points are, so that way no one accidentally negatively impacts your message. The second item is meet your audience where they're at. And with this question, you're particularly talking about state leaders and local leaders. So, being someone who's seen behind the scenes, for both levels, just remember that they're people. Everyone has a lot going on between their regular jobs, their elected jobs, and trying to spend time with their families. And so for them, there is never a cutoff point, to be honest. The clock is always running. You don't just clock out at 5 and that's the end of, receiving a phone call about potholes or calling about whatever the latest big state issue is. You continue to get those phone calls all the time. And so it is an honor to be a public servant, but I do see, all of the time and effort that goes into creating those big initiatives for the state, or going to daily events all across the state, depending on what type of state or local leader you are, and then just trying to make sure that you do spend time meeting with everyday people as well. So with that in mind, I would just say to meet your audience where they're at, and to try to just keep your campaigns as recognizable and digestible as possible. Governor Ivey would often quote the KISS method, and that's keep it simple, stupid. So that always works. And lastly, the third item I would say for building your strategic campaign, your messaging, is to personalize the data. Anybody can look up data points, but when you put a face to the issue, that really helps to sell it. And I know that Collier actually a little while ago had said, engage the people affected. For example, if you have a constituent that has been impacted by whatever the issue is, have them be your surrogate and go and talk to, that state leader or that elected official. You can go with them, or you can send them, just prepare them beforehand, but if they can meet with them and share their personal story, that's going to go a long way versus a lobbying organization saying the exact same thing. So finding surrogates to talk on your behalf is always something that I think has been effective in throughout my career.
Thank you, and thank you, Lori, for sharing that. I really appreciate y'all's unique insight with the grassroots effort and the state leader focus. And now, Jon, will pivot to more of the stakeholders and industry partners focus. So Manufacture Alabama represents a broad coalition of industry stakeholders and leaders. I've had the privilege of working with you and seeing you in action on this, but how do you ensure these stakeholders remain united and effective when you're advocating for complex issues?
We make it do with alternative power.
Yeah, that's a good question, and we won't get into it today, but Lillian really is a pro. We worked very closely for a couple of years on a pretty big issue dealing with childcare and giving individuals who have a barrier to working and participating in the labor force due to childcare, trying to give them options. So we were real successful, and she had a lot to do with that in one of her previous roles. Again, this is a layman speaking, not speaking so much from a communication professional. But when I think about, having a large group of individuals who are your stakeholders, and you're trying to put together a common theme and trying to keep everyone on the same course, it really kind of starts with the mission. The mission has to be kind of your governing, your guide star. At Manufacture Alabama, our mission is very simple. We want Alabama to be the best state in the country, the best location for manufacturing to thrive. that's not just for, well, it's twofold. One, we want those manufacturing companies who have been here for a long time to have an environment where business is so good, they can expand. They can reinvest in their communities. So that's number one. The second is we want this to be a location where companies looking for a new home in North America see Alabama as one of the top locations to invest and create jobs. So that's how we, I guess, govern ourselves as an association each and every day, is keep that in perspective. So it's important to have that clear kind of KISS methodology that Governor Ivey, I guess, uses, according to Lori. That's a good point. When we're communicating with our stakeholders, when we're trying to move the needle on some issue, at the end of the day, with complex issues, you can find it actually to be fairly disruptive. If you have a really complex issue, you can have individuals kind of hone in on certain very specific little sub issues, if you will, and it can become divisive. So you have to keep the main thing with the mission. You have to clearly define what is our end goals. I think it's important from that perspective also to be mindful of who your audience is when you're advocating, and you almost have to tailor that under the overarching mission. So for example, if at Manufacture Alabama as a industry trade group, we're attempting to influence legislation or advocate on a policy issue, our audience is going to be interested in things like economic impact of our industry. That's why I have memorized and spent a lot of time using the numbers $40 billion in annual economic impact to this state, which is the impact from our industry. I also use the number more than 275,000 hardworking men and women who are directly employed by our industry. Those numbers matter. They matter to communities, they matter to policymakers. So we spend a lot of time thinking that way. On the flip side, if it's more of a grassroots type initiative, it's always a great idea to get some personal stories. Get individuals who are willing to speak up and talk about their personal relationship to that topic, maybe why they got invested. That moves the needle as well. So it's kind of a dual-fold kind of strategy, if you will, when it comes to trying to pull everyone together and then think strategically about who your audience is. Thanks.
Great, thanks for that insight and feedback, guys. And now a question for all of you, or as you wish to answer, but touching on more of the crisis management response side of what we do. When an advocacy effort or big public relations push faces that opposition or even potentially a crisis, what are the first steps that you take to regain control of the narrative and protect your objectives to keep that goal and the mission moving forward? And again, you can all answer or pass in any order you like.
Thank you. First of all, I'd say hopefully you have some level of a crisis communications plan that you can implement immediately that's focused on clarity and speed. And to kind of elaborate on that, one of the most important first steps that you can take when faced with a crisis is to ensure that you understand all of the facts, or at least all of the facts that are made available to you at that time, and to simplify your message as much as possible for general consumption. Additionally, it's imperative that you have a well-defined system in place for triaging all the incoming requests from media, constituencies, and the public. So having a clearly defined plan of action and roles of responsibility is essential to regain control in a crisis. And that may be identifying an individual who is going to be the point of contact, and it's very clearly defined that if any reporter is reaching out for information, they know exactly who within the organization to reach out to, and the same could be said for elected officials and others. Being responsive is so important initially, of course, but equally, if not more so, is quickly pivoting to be in a position of communicating proactively to define the narrative on your own terms. And this isn't in my notes, but it's one thing I'll add because it's been mentioned several times, and that is having others, having third parties that are part of that with you, speak out on your behalf. Creating those echo chambers is really important as well.
Well, I think Collier has done an excellent job of really answering that one. I would also throw in just making sure that your message is very transparent, making sure that, you know, if there is some type of issue that needs to be investigated, that you're following up outside of your first statement, and that you're incorporating what your company's values and beliefs are, and just showing them that this may have happened, but we are working toward to make sure that this doesn't happen again, whatever that issue may be. I know that when it comes to a crisis, each one has to be tailored to that particular issue, but I think Collier has really laid the groundwork on that one.
Yeah, just to add a little bit of color commentary, and I'll talk about this probably towards the end. Relationships that you have matter more, in my opinion, than anything in this world. That goes without saying. That's outside the business world as well. But do not wait to have the relationships you need with individuals that can be helpful. Do not wait until the crisis happens. Relationship building is it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's about cultivating trust. And I have, without naming any names or throwing anyone under the bus, I've seen this happen a lot, where the crisis happens with an organization. The leader of that organization starts to reach out to those he or she feels they can help them the most through this. And it's the first time they ever walked through that door. It's the first time they've ever had a contact with that decision maker, that leader in the community. If that's your first time, you're probably not going to get much of a response. That's just how the world works in so many ways. So, I can't emphasize that enough, that, relationships can be very meaningful, can be personal, but they can also be strategic. And at the end of the day, when that crisis unfolds, that first interaction doesn't need to be truly the first interaction you've ever had with someone who can be helpful. I also want to kind of mention, just to add a little flavor too, is when you have a crisis, you obviously have something happening where more than likely you have someone on the other side of you. We'll just call it, for lack of a better term, an opponent. I think it's really important to monitor what the other side is saying very carefully, take stock in that, and at the end of the day, look for misinformation that you may be able to correct that's out there, whether it's social media or traditional media platforms. Also, take stock of what kind of the public sentiment is. What are people saying about or adding to the conversation? So those are things that are important. I think the last thing I'll mention is most likely none of us have all the answers. There's no reason to double down on inaccurate information. If there's a hole in your argument, acknowledge that and figure out how you can solve or address that, and do it transparently. So those are just some comments I have off the top of my head on this one. Thank you.
Absolutely, guys. I think I can definitely echo everything you said. And unfortunately, it sounds like we've all had experience with maybe crisis response or at least an opponent, as Jon said, in the advocacy world. So thanks for that insight. Another question for each of you is in respect to Alabama's economic and political landscape. As we navigate that, what trends do you predict will shape the future of advocacy and public affairs in our state? And what lessons from your careers would you share with others that they could apply and stay ahead as they might encounter the same situations?
Thank you. I think it goes without saying that the polarization of politics is at a fever pitch. We're going to have to learn how to adapt and communicate in a time that's ever changing in a vacuum. So how we do that, I think, will be defined by how our audiences choose to consume that information. Additionally, we're all going to be impacted by the growing developments in technology. AI will continue to put us on our toes, trying to assess how we take advantages of these new developments in a way that helps to ensure we're all utilizing these tools in the most effective manner to reach our goals. I personally think it's going to be fascinating to see how our global political landscape evolves along with these technological advancements change how we reach people in so many different ways. As far as advice, I'm a big believer in learn, and continue to learn. And so again, I think as these technologies are developed, particularly AI, I know myself, I've been pretty enthralled with ChatGPT and others and how that's going to have an impact on what we do. So I just say, keep learning, learn all you can.
Well, from a technological standpoint, I agree with Collier. AI is at a lot of people's top of their mind when it comes to the future. And so I believe that, because it is so wide-ranging and usable and everyday things from, working in manufacturing to utilizing it to create content or speeches or things like that, I think that a lot of companies or public entities and such are going to have to spend time on investing in researching the pros and cons, and then also researching how they can implement policies to allow their teams to utilize it. Because, say if you don't have a policy created and you have a staffer that's unknowingly, without your knowledge, using an AI type of system like ChatGPT, and they're plugging in confidential information or something like that, it's proprietary information. It could be used against you. Once it's in the cloud, it's in the cloud. And so I think that because of that, companies and public entities, they're just going to have to go ahead and set some policies, whether they plan to use it or not. I think they should keep that in the back of their mind. And I know from a municipal standpoint, we've had a conversation with someone who's very knowledgeable about AI, based out of Auburn University, and we had him come and speak, a couple of months ago, and some of our leaders are just trying to see how they can utilize it, whether it is in the form of some type of communications where they don't have a PR person and they want to help get some talking points out, or speeches or press releases, or if they are talking to business owners about some of the concerns about replacing people. Those are some of the things that have come up in conversations. So I'm trying to think of the speaker's name right now, but it was Dr. Assam. He was phenomenal. If anybody needs his contact information, I'd be happy to share it, because he is very knowledgeable on the subject. Or from a general standpoint, I also would say that we have 90% of our municipal elections coming up in August. And right now we are expecting a high turnover rate with our 20 and 30-year veterans. They're planning to retire. And so I see a new era of emerging leaders coming up. And the local elections are happening before, state legislative elections, and then ultimately constitutional officers right after. So I think we'll see a little bit of a younger generation coming in and starting out their public service careers. And so this is a great opportunity if you're an organization to start making those connections like once they come into office. You know, for our organization, I'll give a plug that we do have strategic partners, we have community partners. PRSA Alabama is a great partner to us, and so whenever you can align with people that have similar goals, it's always beneficial. Ultimately, like what he was saying, as far as the workforce, we want our workforce to do well. We're partnering with the community college on some of our municipal training because we recently passed legislation where all municipal leaders have to take our training. And so we are hoping that by setting that foundation, they will be better at, you know, handling the everyday administration duties and things like that. And so if any of you are ever interested in partnering with us and getting to know our leaders, we have events throughout the year and we'd be happy to do that. As far as lessons, I would say build genuine relationships. I know John kind of talked on that a little bit, but build those genuine relationships with your peers, with your leadership, with people that are your stakeholders, and if possible, even with the people that you consider an opponent. Because sometimes, on rare occasions, you might actually agree on something. And, you know, like he said too, you don't want your first contact with them to be something, you know, so negative or something where you're just a needy person. You want to have already established those relationships so that way, you know, it ultimately will make you a stronger communicator. So like, as far as your peers, you know, you will see some of the challenges that they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And you can kind of critique how you're giving them something, like as far as the information, or if you're writing a speech for like your boss and you get to know them and what their preferences are, you can tailor it to them so that they execute what your end goal is in a better way. And so on that, I also would say, you know, overall, just, you know, continue to build those relationships throughout, and also, in addition to the peers and your stakeholders, also build those relationships with the media as well.
All right, well, I'll be brief. A lot was covered by my two panelist colleagues up here, so, and I don't disagree with anything they said. I'll flip it a little bit on its head just to be difficult and argumentative as it relates to technology. So, I mean, technology is a tool. It doesn't replace, you know, necessarily the human touch, if you will. But it's here and it has been here for a long time, and we certainly have to adapt. The one thing I'll mention that I think is hard to replace is kind of a community-driven advocacy approach. And I'll speak from the world that I guess I'm most familiar with, and that is, you know, again, influencing hearts and minds when it comes to public policy decisions, legislation. There's nothing that can compete with the voice of people back home. If you're engaging, you're having communication with an individual who's a lawmaker or, you know, an elected official, the people back home are who put them in office. They're responsible for whether or not that individual has a long career in politics, in service. And so, you know, that's the one thing that really can help move the needle is getting people back home, if you will, from the community engaged in an issue that they believe strongly in. And that, you know, goes back to clear communication, having a strategic vision for how you want to do that. Just for example, again, speaking kind of as thinking in the lens of through the lens of a legislator who has a district. I've seen this a lot. If a legislator receives 5 phone calls from real people in their district, it's like the world has come down on them. You know, it's anecdotal because it's 5 phone calls, but it means a lot because those are 5 individuals in the community who can also stir up, more conversation. And so legislators listen to that. So I think that all the tools out there, obviously social media and all the conversations that can be had in different ways and data-driven analytics and all that are crucial moving forward. But you just can't ever forget the fact that people, in my opinion, is what it's all about. And people can, at the grassroots level, really influence decision makers. So that's truly important, in my opinion, as one of the biggest tools we have in advocacy.
So final wrap up before we open it up to any other questions. And this was touched on a little bit when you all shared some lessons you've learned through your career, but as our closing wrap up question for you all, is there one last piece of advice or piece of wisdom that you would share to individuals or organizations looking to strengthen their advocacy efforts in Alabama?
So, both of you have touched on this, and I promise we didn't share notes. I'm a big fan of the old adage, there's strength in numbers. So I think my one piece of advice would probably be to always look for ways to find allies that share many of the same goals as you, even if you don't align on every objective and issue. Identifying individuals, organizations, and others that you can engage on particular issues when it's mutually beneficial will help maximize your reach and the volume in driving your message, whether that's in the public policy arena or with the general public. And again, I'd echo what Jon said, and that is, it's something that I would recommend and we work really hard at all the time, year round, not when you need it, not when the crisis has arrived, but something that we're very, very intentional about. And so I guess that would be my one piece of advice.
Great piece of advice. For me, it's tell your story. No one can tell your story like you can. Embrace the 5 W's of who, what, when, where, and why. Keep it simple. I mentioned that earlier. We live in such a fast-paced environment where we're constantly consuming content, and some people find the need to just rapidly get something out there, and then also for people in this room, I know I can attest, we wear a lot of hats. We're being asked to, focus on communications, marketing, and public relations, that we have a lot on our plates. And so sometimes you may feel like there's not enough time for creativity. And so I would say when you get to that point, just pause and talk to your teammates, talk to your leadership, and really make sure y'all set out what your priorities are. And that way you can strengthen what your strategic plan is. And ultimately, between all of that, you can really tailor what your message is and make it really resonate with what you're trying to do, and focus on your members and share their story.
Yeah, not a lot left to add. Fun sitting at this end. We're all busy. We're all busy in our jobs and in our personal lives. So sometimes it's important to step back. Have the staff conversations you need to have about where are we going from a big picture. It's just so easy to get wrapped up in the details day to day and all the tasks that are ahead of us. But at the end of the day, again, the mission of your organization is your guide star. And I think it's very healthy for any organization to step back and assess that from time to time. And that can be altered depending on the environment and a lot of different factors, leadership and things like that. I think that's a healthy exercise for any organization. And I think we've kind of gone through that a little bit over the last few years, and just constant communication with the staff. That's one of the things I'm very fortunate we have a pretty small staff, but we work very closely together in constant communication all the time. And it's very, very valuable to kind of keep the organization moving in the same direction. That doesn't mean we don't disagree on issues, but we always find a way to find common ground to get, again, under the header of our mission. And finally, I'll just underscore relationships, building those relationships. I think this is an incredible kind of joint organization you guys have here. This is what it's all about, is just, making some friends and swapping contacts. I mean, it's all common sense stuff, but you just never know who you're going to need to call on at some point. So I just very much value that as well, and have seen that play out very positively through my career. So be persistent, be transparent, and treat people the way you want to be treated. I feel like that's gone a long way in life. So common sense stuff. That's all I got.
That's great. Well, those are all,
So those are our official panel questions, but I think we have a few minutes to open it up if anyone else in the room or online wants to ask our panelists additional insight.
We've got one from the virtual audience that I'll start with, and then hopefully we can get a few more from in person. This is for Lori, this is for you, from Ashton Adams. You mentioned that constituents have more influence than lobbyists. What is the best way to find and connect with people who care about our cause or might be open to it?
So I would say, it depends on what your organization is trying to accomplish. So for us, with it being, let's talk about public safety, that's a good example. For us, everyone recognizes law enforcement people in their uniforms. So, that's an issue that a lot of people can relate to, and so having someone that if they're able to dress an actual uniform whenever they're talking to someone, or if you get them on camera to do like a promo video, that visual I think is good. Also, you can get them to do like op-eds and things as well. But it really, you kind of just have to see what your organization is. You can also do talk to your leadership. If you have a board, and talk to them about some examples of people that they personally have had communication with. I know for us, we have a legal department that answers everyday calls from our municipal leaders. And so they kind of have a good idea of what some of the big topics are because of those conversations. So I would say they would be a good asset for me to go to about what we're currently seeing our members wanting to engage with. So if you have anyone like that on your team that kind of is either doing surveys or is either talking to your constituent base often, then I would say to look at them as a resource, and again, your board and leadership. But then also, as far as, seeing who, it depends which legislator you're trying to target as well, just make sure that if it's someone who is over a committee or in a position of leadership, that you try to potentially find someone in their district, because that will weigh a little bit more too as well than someone who's in far South Alabama, but the leader is in North Alabama. So I would try to, specifically target those whenever possible.
Awesome, thanks. We've got one more question from the virtual audience. This is from Denise Burkhalter, and it can be for Jon or Collier. How important is it to budget for advocacy-related PR campaigns, and how do you determine how you'll budget for those campaigns? And just one reminder on the microphone too, just as close as possible.
So I guess the first thing I would say is it kind of depends on the situation. One of the first things we do, I guess, if we're going into, say, a session and there's an issue, is, we'll poll it first of all and kind of see where things stand. And based on that, then we will develop a communications plan, whether that's focusing on earned media and advocacy, or also We feel like we need to include paid components, whether that be TV, digital, radio, et cetera. So I'm not doing a very good job answering the question, but I'd say it's kind of a based on the situation, but it's certainly very important, and I think you just have to kind of take it on a case-by-case basis. What was the second part? I'm sorry.
It was how do you determine, how you'll budget for those campaigns?
Okay, I think I hit on that, even though it was very vague. John, you want to add anything?
More is better.
John, you're right. More is always better. And honestly, it's just based on, do you have an opponent? And what resources do they have? So there's just a lot of moving parts that really, at the end of the day, would help you best make a determination on what that budget looks like.
I'll actually add one thing to that as well, is I think in this day and age as well, don't feel like because you have a more limited budget that your campaign won't or can't be successful, especially even in the example you gave for defending the park funding. A Facebook group is free to activate and get started. I'm sure they likely utilize some sponsored or paid posts to get it boosted and further pushed out, but there's a lot you can do, and I'm sure you've all done inexpensively or free using social media and relying on a grassroots component. So the more, the better, likely, when you're pushing, especially a statewide campaign, but don't be scared if you're with a smaller organization that might not have the budget to do a large-scale ad campaign, for example.
Michaela, you had a question?
Yeah, so, and this can be for anybody, but what are you guys' insight, or what are you doing to engage the younger professionals or people up and coming to kind of care about the issues that you guys are advocating for, even if it doesn't impact them directly yet?
Well, I'll actually tie in something with your question and with Lillian. So right now, the league is going through a campaign called Live Locally Alabama. We launched that in September, and ultimately, we're trying to use that campaign to increase civic engagement, to promote awareness about all the things that municipal leaders do on a daily basis, and trying to make all of our communities great places to live, work, and play. And so through this campaign, we have created videos in partnership with NPS, where Lillian is at. And also we've done some in-house things as far as creating graphics and press releases and flyers and things to give our municipal leaders, especially the ones that don't have a communications director or someone like that, we gave them resources that they can just pull from and put on their channels. If they want to tailor the items that we've given them, then they're able to do that. But we are ultimately targeting both our membership and the public, because this is a subtle way for us to hopefully influence legislation, because we are seeing a lot of things impacting the way municipalities control their revenues. And so by reminding people of the everyday public service that they provide, garbage pickup and public schools and clean parks and new facilities like that, we're hoping that that will help with conversations that we have going on over there. So this is more of a long-term public strategy for us, our campaign. And so in your question, you're talking about engaging young people. We are trying to do that specifically with this campaign. I recently met with the Higher Ed Partnership, and that they represent all the public universities in our state. And so I am working with a group of their student retention council to help be a part of our campaign, because their ultimate goal is to see young people stay in the state and contribute to the workforce. And so we're hoping that by letting them shoot some phone videos, do some interviews, and be published in our magazine, things like that will help, increase their love for civic engagement, and then also to increase people staying within the state as well.
I'll add just a little bit of flavor, because manufacturing isn't exactly the most exciting topic for some individuals. If you haven't had a family member work in the industry and understand that there are really good paying jobs and upward mobility within the company, then you probably see it as, the historical thought is it's a, dark and dirty and dusty, unpleasant work environment. That's really pretty far from the truth these days. Manufacturing is pretty high tech. In some cases, it's some of the most high tech workplaces we have in the state of Alabama or across the country. One of our things Lori just mentioned that is of utmost importance to us, engaging with the next generation, is on the workforce. We have a program that I take zero credit for, or responsibility for, that was established a few years ago by Robin Ricks in our office, called GLAM, which stands for Girls Learning About Manufacturing. And it's a really interesting program from a workforce development standpoint to try to get young women engaged early in high school. Maybe they're involved and interested in STEM education. Maybe they're involved in, other sorts of technology programs within their school. Maybe they're interested in dual enrollment with the community college system. But connecting them to a local manufacturing facility somewhere near their community they're in, getting them to the facility, seeing what actually goes on in there, and then having conversations with other women who have worked and spent their career there to hear the success stories from their perspective. Just trying to get some awareness that there are really incredible career opportunities. Females make up more than 50% of our population in the state, but they make up a small percentage of the workforce in our industry, and such an incredibly underutilized resource. And we want young women in particular to see themselves in a career. So that's been really a beneficial initiative that we partner with the local school system and get different young women in, to whether it's Mercedes to see how the vehicles are made there, Airbus down in Mobile with how the airplanes are being manufactured. So it's kind of a neat little thing I thought I'd plug that we're trying to do to reach out to the next generation as well from a workforce standpoint.
Well, thank you all again so much for this insight, and to everyone that joined in person and online. That is the wrap for the questions. I'm sure they'll stay and answer anything if you have, but thank y'all again so much.